Hi everyone and welcome back. In today's video we are going to be doing some coloring on Kraft cardstock using some pencil crayons or colored pencils. So we like to call them pencil crayons here in Canada. And I'm going to be using Prismacolor pencils to do all of the coloring. Now since this video is going live on Christmas Day, I thought it would be appropriate to have a Christmas themed card and use the Santa's Elf stamp set. So before we get to the coloring, I do want to wish all of you that celebrate a very Merry Christmas. We hope you're enjoying a great day with friends and family and are looking forward to the start of a fun new year. We can't wait to share 2018 with all of you and hope that you have a really nice holiday season. So now moving on to the card, let's go ahead and start the stamping before we do any coloring. So I have a piece of Kraft cardstock and I have trimmed that down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, which is a standard A2 size card size. And I'm going to ink up this little elf image with our black licorice dye ink. I'm using my mini Misty stamping tool so I can do a double stamp of that image just to get a really nice black outline, but you can definitely just stamp this with an acrylic block if you don't have a Misty. Now I have all of the pencil crayons that I want to use already pulled out and I just kind of put them in a cup so that I kind of know which colors I want to use. And then when I'm going to start my coloring, I like to dump them all out on my desk so that I can easily grab the different colors, since I do go back and forth quite a bit between the various shades of each color. So I am going to start this video off and just kind of explain a couple things about how I like to color with my colored pencils or pencil crayons. Then I'm going to just add some music and let you see the entire coloring process, since it does take a bit to get through it. I didn't want to ramble on the whole time and bore you with me talking. So to start off, I just wanted to mention that when I do colored pencil coloring, I really like to use usually 3 shades per color, and I don't usually use any kind of blending solution. Like I don't use Gamsol, and I don't very often use the blender pen either. You can definitely use any of these mediums. They really help to blend the pencils, and Gamsol looks beautiful when you blend colored pencil with it. I just really like to take my time and do lots of layers of color and just let the pencils actually do all of the blending for me. So what I usually prefer to do is take my very lightest color, which you could see I did there with the turquoise color, and I lay that down on all of the areas that I'm going to have that color. And then once I have my lightest color down, I just go in with my darkest color and add any of the areas where I want shadows to be. So I fill that in with the darkest color. And then I go in with my medium color and kind of pull the darkest and the lightest color together. So I kind of let them meet in the middle with that medium color. And then you can probably tell as I'm coloring that I'm not putting a lot of pressure down onto the paper. I really like to just take my time and add the layers slowly with a light hand. And then as I get to the final layers is when I really like to press down a little bit firmer with my pencil onto the paper and really give it that really smooth finish. Now, like I mentioned before, if you do use Gamsol or any type of other mineral spirit, that's really going to help you blend the pencils quicker and easier. So it's completely optional if you like that look. It gives a really nice smooth finish as well. You do want to keep in mind when you're using Prismacolor pencils that these are wax-based. So if you get too heavy-handed with your color, you can end up with what they call wax bloom, where you kind of have that waxy coating on the top of all your coloring, and then it's really hard to blend the colors together. Which is why I recommend, if you use your pencils alone to do your blending, to really go with a light hand as you add each level of color, and that's going to really help you be able to blend those colors really nicely together on your image. So I'm just going to let the video go now and do all of the coloring. I'm just going to throw some music on like I mentioned before. And I will point out now too, before we get to that part, that once I finish all of my coloring, so once I have everything completely colored with all of the various colors, I do like to go back in with a black pencil crayon and go over all of my line detail to really darken it up and just add it back to the image, since sometimes those colors can kind of mute it down, especially if you color over top of it. Another great option for this, if you don't want to use the pencil crayon, is to leave your stamp in your mini Misty if you did use a stamping tool to stamp the image. And once you have finished completely coloring your image, you can put it back into your Misty and re-stamp it over top of all of the colored pencil. So that's just a couple pointers that I just wanted to add, which you will see at the end here when I finish with the coloring. So I'm just going to throw on some music, finish the coloring process, and then I'll meet you back here to put the cards together. And before we get to that music, I also want to quickly mention that I have all of the Prismacolor colored pencils that I used in this card in the video description below if you want to know the exact colors I am using. I was going to put them on screen, but I found that with the image zoomed in so much, I didn't want to kind of cover up any of the coloring. So all of the colors that I did use are in the video description below. Okay, so now we have all of the coloring finished, and I did add a little bit of shading underneath of the elf just to kind of give him something to stand on so he's kind of grounded on the card design. And now what I'm doing is I'm creating a mask using a Post-it note. So this is just a regular old Post-it note. It just happens to have adhesive all over the entire back. And I'm just taking my scissors and I'm very loosely cutting around this image. You don't have to be perfect and cut right along the lines perfectly. You just pretty much want to have the shape of the elf cut out so that we can cover him up with this masking or sticky note. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to add some paint splatter to the finished card, but I don't want the paint to actually fall on my colored image. I want it to be kind of all around him and around the sentiment that we're going to stamp on. So I put the cardstock panel back into my MISTI. I'm stamping my sentiment onto that panel, and I did a double stamp once again to get a really nice black impression. And now I'm going to take this from my MISTI and add that mask over top of that little elf. Now I like to use a box kind of as a splatter area to kind of catch all of the ink when I'm doing any kind of paint splatter. So I am going to put this panel into a box and then I'm going to add some white paint to it. Now for the white paint, I usually like to use my Copic opaque white ink paint, but I didn't have any left. So I'm just using this here. This is just some PH Martin. You can use anything. You can use white acrylic paint. You can use Tim Holtz paint. Any type of white paint will work. And what I like to do is I like to just put it onto an acrylic block, and then I like to take some water and spritz that onto the block with the paint. And this is just going to thin that paint a bit and help it to kind of move a little bit easier off of the acrylic block and kind of water it down a tiny bit to give you a really nice splatter when you apply it to the card. So I'm just mixing that up to make sure I have the water and the paint really nicely mixed together. And then I'm just going to put this panel into my splatter box and apply this paint directly to the panel. Now what I like to do to get a really nice splattered look is I like to leave the paint on the acrylic block, and then I just have a paintbrush that I use specifically for this. It has some really firm bristles on it, and I just kind of like to flick that paint right off the side of the acrylic block. And you can see there we get this really nice splatter where we have some really small, tiny droplets, and then we have some really large ones. So I really like the mix of the two together. Now once I'm happy with the paint splatter, I kind of wanted it mostly concentrated around the colored image. I'm going to take this from my splatter box here and just use my tweezers to very carefully lift up that mask. And it's going to leave us with this adorable elf image that we have with these nice rich colors from the colored pencil. And we have this great paint splatter kind of all the way around him. Now, if you do get some on the sentiment and you don't love where it ends up, you can kind of dab it off a tiny bit, but I actually prefer the look of the paint on the sentiment as well as on the cardstock background. Now, before I turn this into a finished card, I do want to show you two more of these that I did create off camera, and I followed the exact same technique with my coloring as I did with this one. I just changed up the colors a little bit and used the other images from the stamp set. So for this one here, I'd use mainly reds. So the reds that I used on his shoes and his ornament on the first card, I used as his main color on his hat and his shirt. And then I used the same aqua colors for his present and his shoes on this one. And then I did the same paint splatter technique and I stamped a different sentiment with this one. For the last one, I used the third image from the stamp set. I used the same colors, but just changed them up once again. And for that one there, I did add a little bit of green as well for the holly leaves. And then I did the same paint splatter and another sentiment on that one. And then to turn these into finished cards, I just added two of the panels to an electric red card base. And I did trim all of the panels down with an A2 stitch rectangle STAX die. And I added the third one onto a tropical teal card base. So now we have this trio of holiday cards with some really fun pencil coloring on the Kraft cardstock, which provides this really rich color, and I just love how these images turned out. So once again, I just want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. As always, I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in another video soon.